The wind that moved through Black Hollow carried the smell of old ash, that dry, bitter scent that never quite left a place once fire had claimed it. The year was 1887, Wyoming Territory, where the land stretched so far and empty it made a man feel like a ghost long before death took him. The sun had already sunk behind the buttes, and the last orange light spilled across the valley, like blood drying on the dirt. What had once been the Weller Ranch lay silent, its fences blackened, its barn collapsed into char and splinters. Only two crosses stood crooked on the hill, one small, one tall, each cut by a trembling hand years ago. They said the man who owned this land burned with it, but the earth never told the same story twice. At dusk, a rider came down from the north ridge, slow, deliberate, his horse favoring one leg. The rider was gray around the temples, the sort of man who looked like he'd lived through more winters than he cared to count. A scar cut across his jaw and vanished into his collar. His eyes had a strange light, not wild, not desperate, just steady, like a man who'd made peace with something he should never have had to. The horse breathed hard, and he patted its neck without a word as they passed the empty well and the remains of the gate. By the time he reached town, night had settled in full. Black Hollow wasn't much anymore. A half-dozen buildings leaning into the wind, a saloon with a flickering lantern, a church with no preacher, and a small inn with paint peeling off its sign, Boone's Lodging. Inside, the smell of stew and coal smoke offered a kind of mercy. The woman behind the counter looked up when he entered. Her hair was pulled tight in a bun, streaked with gray, but her face still kind, though tired. She wiped her hands on her apron and gave him a cautious nod. "Need a room?" she asked. He set his saddlebag on the counter and nodded once. His voice, when it came, was rough with dust and years. "For a few nights." She studied him like a woman who'd seen too many men drift through town and vanish into trouble. "That'll be $1, and supper's another 50 cents. Ain't much, but it's warm." He placed the coins down, his movements slow, deliberate. "Warm's good enough." Later, as he ate by the fire, a few locals came and went. Ranch hands, traders, a boy sweeping the floor. The drifter didn't speak, but the way he looked around, at the cracked walls, at the faces, at the worn photographs hanging behind the bar, made people whisper. Martha Boone leaned toward the barkeep and murmured, "He looks like he's seen ghosts." The barkeep, a soft-bellied man with a nervous laugh, muttered back, "Or maybe he's one." Outside, the wind carried dust across the main street, hissing softly against the windows. The drifter finished his meal and stepped out onto the porch, lighting a small match to his cigarette. He watched the saloon lights down the street. Loud laughter, piano music off-key. Men with guns on their hips swaggering like they owned the earth. Above it all hung a sign freshly painted, McGraw Freight and Holdings. Even the paint smelled of arrogance. The drifter's jaw tightened. He turned from the light and walked into the dark. That night, when most of Black Hollow slept, he rode quietly out of town, his horse's hooves sinking into the ash-colored dirt. The moon hung low and cold, silvering the ruins of a ranch that once stood proud. He dismounted where the old fence had collapsed and moved through the wreckage like a man walking through a dream. His boots crunched on glass. The charred doorframe still leaned upright, black as coal. He crouched near the steps and brushed away dust until something small gleamed, a bit of metal shaped like a buckle, half buried. He turned it over in his hand, then reached into his saddlebag and drew out a small, weathered boot. A child's boot, one side burned through, the other still soft, where the leather had been spared. He knelt there a long time, eyes closed, lips moving though no sound came. Then, with careful fingers, he dug a shallow hole beside the crosses and placed the boot inside. When he finished, he pressed the dirt flat, the weight of his hand trembling against the ground. A coyote cried somewhere beyond the ridge. The man looked up toward the sound, the lines of his face carved deep by moonlight and grief. "They're resting now," he said softly, his voice hoarse and distant. "And soon you will too." When he mounted his horse again, he didn't look back at the graves, but the animal hesitated as if sensing something heavy behind them. The wind shifted, carrying a faint whisper through the scorched grass, almost like a name, almost like Thomas. By morning, the stranger was back in town, eating in silence at Martha Boone's table. She poured him coffee and asked, "You passing through, mister?" He looked up slowly, eyes the color of old steel. "Maybe. Not many come this way unless they got business," she said, studying him. "You got business?" He sipped his coffee. "Not the kind folks talk about." Her son's photograph hung on the wall behind her, a boy of 10 with a straw hat too big for his head. Martha caught him staring and set the pot down hard. "Kay McGraw took him," she said quietly, anger and pain fighting in her voice. "Said he'd make him work off our debt. That was 4 years ago. Haven't seen him since." The drifter's gaze didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw moved once. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Sorry don't do much good in Black Hollow," she replied. Then softer, "But thank you for saying it." When she turned away, the drifter's hand tightened on his cup. He looked at the steam rising, curling like smoke, and saw it at the same fire that had once lit up the valley. The night everything ended. For a moment, the smell of burning pine filled his nose again. The scream of a child echoed faintly in his ears. He closed his eyes and breathed slow until it passed. By sundown, word had spread about the new man in town. The saloon buzzed with talk. Who he was, where he came from, what he wanted. Some said he was a bounty hunter. Others said an ex-soldier gone mad. But when a drunk mentioned the name Weller, the room went still. Heard that name once. The drunk slurred. Old Thomas Weller had a wife, a little boy, and a ranch just west of here. Kane McGraw burned him out. Sheriff said the whole family died in that fire. The barkeep spat into a tin can. Dead men don't rent rooms. From her corner, Martha Boone heard the talk and felt a strange chill. That night, after closing, she found the drifter sitting on the porch, cleaning his saddle. The moonlight caught the side of his face, and for a moment, she could have sworn she saw something familiar in him. The shape of his eyes, maybe, or the way he moved slow, careful, like someone who carried ghosts on his back. "You remind me of somebody," she said. He looked up, the ghost of a smile flickering and dying. "I get that sometimes." "You been out by the old ranch?" she asked. "Tracks lead that way." He met her gaze for a heartbeat too long, just looking around. "Nothing left to see there," she whispered. "Depends what a man's looking for." She didn't ask more. Some silences were too heavy to touch. When he went to his room, she stood watching the empty street through the window, dust swirling, lamplight trembling. Somewhere far out beyond the town, thunder rumbled faintly over the plains. She crossed herself and whispered, "God help us all." By mid-morning the valley lay under a stillness so deep it felt like the earth itself was holding its breath. The wind no longer bothered to pass through Black Hollow. It seemed even the air was tired of the place. Kane McGraw's brand hung over every acre like a curse. His riders collected tax from farmers and shopkeepers as if God himself had deputized them. No one spoke against it. Those who did were buried out past the dry creek, crosses whittled from fence posts. After the last storm, the inn's roof had half caved in. Martha Boone climbed up with a hammer and willpower alone until the drifter appeared beneath her ladder. Without a word, he steadied it, then climbed beside her. He worked with slow precision, pulling nails straight, setting new shingles as if he'd built 100 roofs in his life. Sweat darkened his collar, but his movements were patient, almost reverent. From the street, townsfolk paused to watch. The same man who never smiled, whose eyes seemed to weigh the horizon. When they finished, Martha poured him coffee on the porch. "You didn't have to," she said. He sipped, eyes on the far hills. Didn't figure anyone else would. She looked at his hands, scarred, calloused, sure. "You fix things quiet. That scares men like McGraw more than guns." He met her gaze, just long enough to make her look away. Toward evening the saloon came alive, the one place where McGraw's men laughed loud enough to remind everyone who ruled. The drifter sat in the corner nursing one drink, hat low, the mirror behind the bar reflecting every movement. Piano music stumbled through the smoke, then stopped when Holt Redding, McGraw's right hand, slammed his glass down. A young farmer's daughter stood near the counter with a sack of flour clutched to her chest. She'd come to settle her father's debt. Redding grinned, mean and toothy. "Payment's short," he said, tipping her chin with his glove. "Maybe you got something else worth trading." The room went silent except for a fly buzzing over spilled beer. The girl flinched back. Laughter rippled among the men. Then the drifter's chair scraped the floor. He moved without hurry. Just one step, another. "Let the girl go." His voice carried low, steady, with something inside it that made the laughter die. Redding sneered. "Who the hell?" He never finished. A flash of metal, a blur of motion. The drifter's hand came up, and Redding's revolver was suddenly in his own. The lieutenant froze, staring at his empty holster. The crowd didn't breathe. The drifter thumbed the hammer back, eyes calm as lake water. "You drop your pride, boy," he said softly, "or I'll drop you faster." Redding's jaw worked, but he saw the truth in those eyes. There'd be no warning shot. He stepped back, hands raised. The drifter lowered the gun, spun it once, and set it on the bar. "You ought to keep better company," he told the girl. She ran out crying, and still no one spoke. Later, when the saloon emptied, two of McGraw's men carried their shaken lieutenant home. By dawn, the story had crossed the valley twice. A gray-haired stranger had humiliated Holt Redding in front of half the town. They called him the Gray Ghost before the day was done. In the big house on the hill, McGraw listened while his foreman recited the tale. The outlaw-turned-landlord leaned back in his chair, cigar smoke curling around his scarred face. "A ghost, huh?" he said, half laughing. "Then let's see if ghosts bleed." He sent 4 riders into town with orders. Watch him. Find out his name. Break whoever talks to him. By sunset, fear had tightened its grip again. Martha noticed the change. Doors closed earlier. Whispers died when she walked by. That night she found the drifter outside, sitting on the trough, moonlight silvering his shoulders. "You shouldn't have done it," she said quietly. "McGraw doesn't forgive." He didn't look up. "Neither do I." She studied him for a long moment. The wind stirred the hem of her dress. "You talk like a man who already lost everything." He drew a slow breath. Maybe that's the only kind who can stand up to men like him. She wanted to ask more, but his silence said enough. When she went inside, he stayed there, staring toward the Black Hills where McGraw's mansion glowed like an ember against the night. Somewhere behind those eyes flickered the memory of another uniform, another war. He could still feel the coarse wool of the Union coat against his neck, the weight of the marksman's badge pinned to his chest. He remembered the smell of gun oil and the whistle of many balls over mud and screams. Back then he believed a bullet could clean a man's conscience if fired for the right cause. But the war ended, and the world didn't get better. It just changed uniforms. He'd come home to fences burned, his wife's hair tied in a sheriff's rope, his boy's laughter cut short. Now the same steady hands that once took aim for a country had learned to hold their fire until justice was worth the bullet. The next evening a storm rolled in heavy from the west, lightning flashing behind the ridge. The drifter rode out to check Martha's animals before the rain broke. From a distance he saw torchlight moving along the far pasture, too steady to be lightning, too many to be travelers. He slid from the saddle and crouched behind a mesquite. The smell hit him first, kerosene. Then the flames bloomed. McGraw's men were burning a farmer's barn, laughing as the roof caved in, the livestock screaming inside. The drifter's rifle was slung behind him. His hand reached, but stopped halfway. The old discipline tightened in his chest. Wait, not yet. He watched their faces in the firelight, memorized each one. When the roof collapsed, sparks rained over the field like dying stars. The riders turned their horses and vanished into the dark, leaving behind smoke and ruin. He walked to the ashes once they were gone, the rain starting in cold needles. He could hear someone sobbing in the distance, a woman, maybe the farmer's wife, though he didn't go to her. Instead, he knelt near the smoldering wreck and ran his fingers through the wet ash. The smell brought back every night he'd tried to forget. Screams, fire, the weight of his child in his arms. The names came out of him in a whisper, one by one. Sarah, Ben. He lifted a handful of dirt, let it fall through his fingers, mixing with the rain until it turned to mud. "I buried my love once," he murmured, voice barely more than breath. Lightning cracked over the hills, revealing his face, hard, streaked with rain and soot. This time, I'll bury my hate in men." The thunder swallowed the words, but the land seemed to hear them. Somewhere out beyond the ridgeline, a coyote answered, and the night closed in again around Black Hollow, heavy with smoke and the promise of reckoning. The days shortened and the air grew sharp, the kind of cold that carried every sound for miles. Black Hollow moved like a wounded animal, quiet, tense, waiting for the next blow. But somewhere under that silence, something was stirring. The drifter began spending more time with Martha's boy, Eli, a thin-shouldered kid with eyes too old for his age. He'd lost his father to McGraw's tax collectors years ago, but he still looked at the drifter the way a starving man looks at food. They rode out past the creek one morning, the frost still white on the sagebrush. The drifter set up bottles on a fence rail and handed the boy a rifle. "You ever fired one?" he asked. Eli nodded. "Once. Missed the can and near shot our mule." The drifter smirked faintly, then leveled his own rifle, sighted, and fired. The bottle exploded. "A man's aim ain't in his hand," he said. "It's in his heart. You steady that, and your shot won't miss." Day after day, they met before sunrise. He taught the boy to clean his gun, track prints in dust, and move quiet enough to hear his own breath. Sometimes they practiced under the cottonwoods, sometimes in the old barn where no one could see. Word spread in whispers. Someone was teaching folks how to fight again. A blacksmith named Avery came first, then two farmers, a widow with a crossbow she'd hidden since her husband's death. They gathered in the inn's cellar after dark, oil lamps turned low. The drifter spoke little, showing instead how to reload fast, how to shoot in rhythm with the heartbeat. His voice stayed calm even as he described killing. "Don't shoot for anger," he said. "Anger makes your hand shake. Shoot for truth. It won't lie to you." Martha watched them one night from the stairs, her hands clenched around her apron. There was something haunting in the way he stood in the lamplight, the shadows tracing the deep scars along his neck. She'd seen wounds like that once before, on a man dragged half dead through town years ago, Thomas Weller. The memory hit her hard. The smoke, the smell of blood, the sheriff turning away as McGraw's men nailed a notice to the post, property transferred. She'd buried that memory like the rest, but now it clawed its way back. Later that night, she found him outside the barn, running a whetstone along a knife. The moon glowed faint behind thin clouds. "You're not who you say you are," she said. He paused but didn't look up. "I never said who I was." "You've got his eyes," she whispered. "Thomas Weller's. You've got his scars too. They left him for dead." He turned, the knife gleaming. "And maybe they were right," he said softly. "The name's dead. Only the debt remains." Martha's throat tightened. "You're risking everyone. McGraw already took everyone that mattered." His voice broke just enough for her to hear the man behind it, the husband, the father. Then it hardened again. "He thinks this town forgot what it feels like to fight. He's wrong." In the days that followed, strange things began to happen. McGraw's wagons carrying stolen grain were found burned outside the valley. Two of his riders vanished between Black Hollow and the mining road. The sheriff woke to find his badge nailed to his door with a single bullet hole through it. Rumor spread faster than truth, that a ghost rode at night, that the dead man of the Weller Ranch had come back for blood. Each act fed the next. The drifter worked like a man possessed, mapping trails, marking weak spots, moving supplies through the canyon. The townsfolk started leaving lanterns burning in their windows at night, signals to one another that they still had fight left. For the first time in years, people spoke Kay McGraw's name without lowering their voices. McGraw's temper grew blacker by the hour. He doubled his guards, bought more rifles, and accused his own men of betrayal. "Find this ghost," he snarled, slamming his fist on the table, "or I'll hang the lot of you." Fear ate through his ranks like rotten timber. One evening, Martha came to the barn where the drifter was cleaning his rifle. "Eli says you're teaching them how to kill," she said. He didn't look up. "I'm teaching them how to live. You think killing McGraw will give you peace?" He paused, thumb resting on the trigger guard. "Peace," he said quietly. "No, but maybe the land will breathe again. Maybe your boy won't grow up afraid." She wanted to stop him, to plead for mercy or reason, but there was something in his eyes she couldn't reach, like staring into the heart of a fire too long. "Don't lose what little of yourself you've got left," she whispered. He smiled then, a small, hollow thing. "What's left is enough." That night the fog rolled down from the hills, blanketing the town in a cold hush. The drifter and his small band moved like shadows through the alleys, leaving signs McGraw couldn't ignore. A burned cart here, a cut rein there, a whispered warning painted on the side of a freight wagon. The past rides tonight. For the first time, McGraw didn't ride out to collect his tax. He barricaded himself in his mansion, candles burning through the day. His men kept watch in pairs, eyes wide at every sound. He started sleeping with his boots on. The drifter knew fear was worth more than bullets. Each night he pushed harder, his body aching but his purpose burning steady. When sleep came, it brought memories sharper than any knife. He saw again the night of the fire, the gang dragging him through the dirt, fists breaking his ribs, the hiss of torches catching dry timber. He remembered his wife's scream and his son's small hand reaching through smoke. They'd left him bleeding in the dust, a bullet through his shoulder, watching everything he loved turn to cinders. He woke with that image every morning, the smell of smoke still in his lungs. By the second week, McGraw's men began deserting. Some ran south. Others tried to flee with stolen money and didn't make it past the creek. The drifter caught them one by one, never killing without purpose. But when he found the man who'd worn his boy's scarf as a trophy, something inside him snapped. The next dawn, a body hung from the cottonwood outside town, swinging slow in the wind. A sign pinned to the chest read, "For my boy." Martha saw it first. She covered Eli's eyes and turned him away, but the message spread faster than the sunrise. Men whispered in awe, women wept in secret. The sheriff tried to cut the body down, but none of McGraw's riders would touch the rope. They said the ghost of Thomas Weller was watching. That night the valley stayed silent. No riders, no music from the saloon, no barking dogs. Even the wind seemed to hold still, as if the land itself waited to see what would happen next. The narrator's voice might have said, if anyone had been listening, that Black Hollow hadn't heard justice speak in years. That night, it whispered. The dawn came slow, pale light spilling over the ridges, like a secret the mountains weren't ready to share. Black Hollow lay still, shutters closed, the air thick with waiting. Then the thunder of hooves shattered the silence. Kane McGraw's riders stormed down the main street, a dust storm of leather, rifles, and hate. Men leaned from their saddles, shouting, "Come out, ghost! Show yourself!" Their voices echoed off empty buildings, swallowed by the wind. McGraw rode at the front, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, his face drawn tight as old rope. He'd built his empire on fear, but this morning, even the wind seemed to mock him. He dismounted in the center of town and fired a shot into the air. The echo rolled across the valley like thunder. "You think you can hide behind these people?" he roared. "You think I'll let a dead man ruin me? Come on out, Weller. Let's finish this." The echo faded. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, from the canyon road, came the sound of a single horse. Slow, deliberate. The riders turned as one, rifles lifting. Through the dust rose a silhouette, long coat torn, hat pulled low, rifle strapped across his back. The wind carried him forward like a judgment long overdue. The people watching from their windows felt it before they saw his face. Something final had come to Black Hollow. He stopped at the edge of town. The horse pawed the dirt, steam rising from its nostrils. The drifter, Thomas Weller, swung down and walked forward. His boots made no sound. His eyes locked on McGraw. The air between them felt carved from glass, brittle and waiting to break. McGraw spat into the dirt. "Who the hell are you?" Weller reached up, took off his hat, and let the wind lift the ash-colored hair from his brow. "The man you should have finished burning." A murmur rippled through the watching townsfolk. McGraw's grin twitched but didn't hold. "So the ghost finally crawled out of his grave," he said, drawing his pistol. "I'll put you back in it myself." Weller didn't flinch. "You'll need a bigger hole." Then came the sound, a soft click as hammers were pulled back. From alleys, doorways, and rooftops, men and women stepped out, farmers, blacksmiths, even the widow with her crossbow. Martha Boone stood in front of her inn, a rifle steady in her hands. Eli beside her, jaw tight. The people of Black Hollow lined the street behind Weller, silent but ready. McGraw looked around, realizing too late that the fear he'd sown had turned into something else entirely. "You think they'll save you?" he barked. "They're not here to save me," Weller said. "They're here to bury you." The first gunshot split the morning. One of McGraw's men fell backward off his horse, dust exploding beneath him. Chaos erupted. The crack of rifles, the screams of panicked horses, gun smoke thick as fog. Weller moved through it like he'd been born inside war. Each shot from his rifle found its mark, precise, unhurried, merciless. The years of pain had sharpened him into something unstoppable. Eli reloaded beside him, trembling. "Mr. Weller." "Keep your head down," Weller said, "and breathe steady." A bullet tore through Weller's sleeve, grazing his arm. He barely noticed. He pivoted, fired, dropped another man from 50 paces. Martha shouted for cover as glass shattered from the saloon windows. Two of McGraw's riders fell trying to flank the townsfolk. The third turned and fled, but a farmer's shot cut him down before he reached the ridge. Through the smoke, Weller saw McGraw retreat toward the saloon, dragging a wounded leg. Weller followed, stepping over bodies, his revolver empty now, his rifle slung back into his grip. Inside, the saloon was half on fire, whiskey spilling from broken barrels, the piano keys gleaming through the smoke like teeth. McGraw crouched behind the bar, bleeding from his side, pistol shaking in his hand. "You don't have to do this," he rasped. "You've already won." Weller stepped closer, his boots crunching over glass. "You took my family, my land, my name." He reached into his coat and pulled out a burned photograph, the only thing left from the fire. A woman and a boy smiled faintly in the blackened edges. He placed it on the counter between them. "Now I'm taking what's left." McGraw's laugh came out broken. "You can't bring him back, Weller." Weller leveled the rifle. His voice was steady, quiet. "No, but I can send you to him." The shot thundered through the saloon. For a heartbeat, the flames froze in the mirror's reflection. Then McGraw's body hit the floor. The gun slipped from his hand and clattered against the wood, spinning once before going still. Outside, the gunfire had died. The wind carried the smell of smoke and cordite through the street. Weller walked out slowly, the rifle lowered. The townsfolk stared, unsure whether to cheer or mourn. Martha stepped forward, eyes wet. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded once. "No," he said. "It's just quieter now." Eli stood beside him, looking up at the man who'd taught him how to fight. "What do you do now?" Weller looked toward the canyon, the horizon stretching wide and red beneath the morning sun. "This land don't need me no more," he said. "But somewhere, there's always another McGraw." He holstered his gun, mounted his horse, and without another word, rode into the wind. The dust swallowed him whole, leaving only the echo of hooves fading into distance. Months passed. The burned buildings were rebuilt, the crops grew again, and laughter slowly returned to the streets of Black Hollow. Martha Boone ran the inn with steady hands and a peace she hadn't felt in years. Eli wore a tin star now, walking the same street where fear once ruled. When he passed the saloon's new door, he always glanced east, as if expecting to see a rider crest the hill. Sometimes at dusk, when the sun sank low and the light turned the dust red as blood, travelers swore they saw a lone figure on horseback at the edge of town, a man with a torn coat and eyes like gunmetal, watching in silence before fading into the canyon. The folks of Black Hollow stopped fearing ghosts after that. They just tipped their hats and went on with their work, knowing some spirits didn't haunt, they guarded. They took his family, his land, and his name, but not his revenge. And somewhere in the red dust of Wyoming, folks still swear they see him at sundown, watch him, waiting, keeping the West honest.